What is that?
Oh.
Yes.
Service amendment, right now.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm ready. Okay, it's 6:38. We'll call the policy committee meeting to order. Welcome, Galen. Everyone should have your packets with the notes from Shipman and Goodwin. So we will start at the top of the agenda and see how much we can make it through since we are starting a little late. So the first policy is, excuse me, policy number 4241, absence of school staff. Shipman recommends repealing this policy as it is addressed through collective bargaining. Dr. Cook requested to keep this policy. It has been reviewed by central office and there were very minor changes made. So I would ask Dr. Cook to speak to this about why you wanted to keep this policy in and how it would work with the bargaining.
Absolutely. So this and its administrative reg are in use right now. So we by trimester. That's why we changed it from quarterly to regular. But we do trimester wise. Heather Dobson looks at the attendance of staff, sends out information to the principals and monitors that. And so we'll give them information. So obviously, if there's any attendance issues that are qualified for FMLA or long-term absence, things like that. But they do, if there are concerns, have conversations with employees, and we found that to be effective in terms of keeping, regular and punctual attendance.
And there's no conflict or anything with the collective bargaining?
No, they're it's in place at this point, and there has not been any issues.
Does anyone on the committee have any comments, questions, or concerns?
I do, since I'm a newbie. How often do we usually overrule or disregard Shipman's recommendations?
Whenever I want to.
That was a softball.
No, I think they're clear about recommending, and they know there's some that are specific to specific districts. So they know, Madison will have their own specific ones. I think Gilbert uses Shipman, Gilbert have their specific ones. So there are, specific policies. We've done this time to time. I think where we're careful of it is when it's more of a legal issue, that they're recommending something. So and sometimes we'll go back to them and say, this is what we're thinking, but that is when we double check with them and they said, no, if it's in place.
This makes perfect sense to me. I mean, to keep it.
Yep.
Yeah. It's most of the changes that Shipman and Goodwin recommend are based on their own policies and then also based on state statute and other public acts. All right, so if there's no other questions or concerns about policy 4241, I think we'll go just in a row and vote on these as we go, because I'm not sure how far we'll get, and then I don't want to have to wrap up at the end really quick. So if everyone is in agreement about this revised policy, then we can agree to move it forward to the board for acceptance as a revised policy.
Need a motion?
We could do a motion. Thank you. Second, all in favor? Great. Okay. And the next policy is policy number 4300, recognition of service awards. This policy is not required by law. Awards mentioned in this policy are routinely given and are recognized convocation, the retiree event, board meetings, etc. our committee requested to keep the policy, and we had Dr. Cook update it with our current award practices. So if you look at it, there's been, a few changes that are pretty minor. This is something that is specific to our district. Does anyone have any questions, remarks, concerns about 4300?
Just wondering if as volatile as the education market is now in retaining teachers. We ought not to have staff honored after every year of service. But
No. This gives them incentive to stay.
yes, no,
I think it's terrific.
It's a goal line check.
Yeah, we discussed briefly about how, Shipman Goodwin said we don't need it, but we like to do the recognition. We think it's a worthwhile pursuit.
we also thought, I think it was expressed last meeting, that we want there to be a recognition that the board recognizes not only the district service and whatever.
So were there any other changes or comments to this? Is everyone good with this? So we'll need a motion then to move forward to the board. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so the next next policy is 9220.3 board member resignation. You should have also this one was a little confusing because there are actually 4 copies in here. We're looking at 9220.3 board member resignation, as well as 9220.5 unexpired term fulfillment / vacancies. So the current policies, originally, if you look at the notes from Shipman and Goodwin, they recommended repealing 9220.3 and replacing it with their model policy, which was 9220.5. And then they suggested to repeal 9220.5 and replace it with their model bylaw filling vacancies 9220.3. So if you look at this, the first copy that you have says current 9220.3. This is actually the current policy. Then you have 9220.5, the unexpired term fulfillment vacancies, also the current policy. Then we have the 9220.5 that Shipman and Goodwin originally revised. And we looked at it here in committee and said that this revision does not comply with our town charter. And therefore we don't want it. And so we were going to just leave 9220.5, and we had Shipman and Goodwin take a look at it again. And they decided to revise 9220.3 filling vacancies on the board. So, so we will look at the newly revised version of 9220.3 with respect to our current versions 9220.3 and 9220.5. Is everyone with me?
Yes.
The paragraph version is the one that we're, the 2 clauses, is the one that we're considering as the replacement to the other 2.
Okay, so the replacement, the revised version that they are recommending says board member resignation, and there's 2 paragraphs, and the second one says vacancy. So they're combining the 2 into a new 9220.3. Now, my question on this would be, so I like the way that the paragraph reads under vacancies, because that is consistent with our town charter, and is pretty much just a more expanded version of what our old 9220.5 says. Because it just refers, the new version refers to section 6.6 in the Madison Town Charter, which is new. So if you want to look that up in your copy of the town charter, you can, but it's literally exactly what it says. Excuse me. So the first paragraph, board member resignation. The only thing that I'm wondering about on this is that in lines 8 to 10, where it says if a board member's permanent residence ceases to be in the Madison School District, the board member will resign immediately. So if you actually read the bylaws, which I happen to have a copy of my own right here. Give me a second. Oh, sorry, the charter. Thank you. So when it talks about the resignation, in the past, the board member who was resigning would write a letter of resignation, and they would give a copy to the board chair, And I believe they would also give one to the town clerk, is that correct, Seth?
Yes.
So this doesn't actually say that, and I couldn't actually find that specific wording in our town charter, but I'm concerned that it's not in here and it should be in here, because that is like the current practice. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Does the town clerk have a direct role in like notifying the party that
I don't
there's
know.
a vacancy that they're entitled to make or?
I'm not really sure how that whole thing works.
I think that's the person, not that we wouldn't, but that's the person that notifies the first select board. We're just gonna start that process.
So,
Again, it's not like we're not going to accept it if it didn't have it on there, we would still. Accept
Yeah,
it.
the question is, should we be directory in terms of telling someone,
Sure.
turn it into us, but also turn it into the clerk? So that, you know, vacancy can be addressed as quickly as possible.
right.
Sure.
I mean, I agree that I don't think it would hurt for us to add. You know, copy to the board and the copy to the clerk.
So I'm just looking for, I thought I had written notes. So let's see. Oh, okay, so if you look at in the charter, section 8.6 on page 23, it says, eligibility for membership on appointed boards and commissions. Only an elector of the town shall be eligible for appointment to any commission. Any person ceasing to be an elector of the town shall thereupon cease to be a member of such commission, and the office shall be deemed vacant.
That's interesting. Because an elector is broader than a resident. An elector is anyone who owns at least $1,000 worth of property in town. So this is not in keeping with our charter. Is the intent that there be a resident and not just an elector?
I don't know, because I don't know if the previous version of the charter had that exact wording, or if it was resident. I kind of think it said resident. And so that might be a new wording, in which case they're not in sync with each other now.
I mean, my personal feeling is I would rather have someone who's bound to the town and living here. Rather than, you know, a summer resident with a cottage. For
Right, but we
example,
can't,
lives out of state. Have difficulty attending and being involved in everything.
but we can't have bylaws that don't follow the statute. But the statute says, like, they set the rules and they supersede us. So
Well-
we can't be more restrictive.
But that's not statute, that's charter. And can we be more restrictive than charter?
So in the past, there was, I forget which issue it was now, but when we took it to Shipman and Goodwin. Oh, it had to do with whether or not we could say you could run for a board of ed, to be a board member. If we could limit the number of terms.
Yeah,
And because our charter does not limit the number of terms, the Board of Ed cannot have that in their bylaws that we limit the terms. So in that sense, then I think it is the same thing. I don't think that we, as a Board of Ed, can say in our bylaws that you have to be a resident of the
Right.
town of
Because
Madison.
otherwise you could say, have to be left-handed redhead to be elected. to the board.
Right,
Yeah, we're all-
so
well,
we
that's
have
not
to.
necessarily the case, we have to be reasonable. The question is, I mean, the difference here, though, is that the charter was silent on that. So Tom Mooney was saying if the charter is silent, we can't restrict further. Here, the charter specifically says electors.
It
It
does.
does say electors,
I think it would be a good idea to get legal advice on this, because I'm with you, Seth, I would rather it say resident, but my gut's telling me we have to.
We may have to keep it,
do that.
I'm pretty
Election.
sure
Yeah.
that we would have to follow whatever the charter says.
wait for the next.
unless
charter.
state law is different, because I also. Haven't seen in here that you can't be an employee of the board. And be on the board. So that's always been something that immediate resignation happens if you accept employment with the Board of Ed. So I wonder if there's something more specific in state law that says resident, because I've always heard resident. You have to be a resident of the town.
And that's how I had always heard it before. too.
Sure,
So
yeah.
when I looked at the new charter, I was like,
No, we definitely have to check that.
yeah,
Yeah,
all right,
so
so that's,
Yes, we need to clarify the distinction, legal distinction between elected and resident first of all.
The other thing is
And then-
technically,
and then-
yeah, sorry,
Examine at each level, state,
yeah,
yeah, okay.
and technically. I mean, because state would override town charter,
right,
But, I mean, technically, a resident, you know, what would prevent a resident who's 17 from running for board of ed? You know, I mean, that's happened in other towns. We've had like a 17-year-old win for first elected. In one town, so, you know, I think we need to double check on there.
and I also don't really, I'm not fond of the wording in this paragraph, because it says the board member will resign immediately. It's not. I guess I don't like the wording because it's not really up to the member to resign, like, they have to resign, it's not like. I don't know if you're following what I'm
Yeah.
saying,
I
but.
understand.
Because even if they didn't submit a written statement of resignation, they would still have to be considered resigned, and it would still be considered an open position on the board based on our charter.
Right, that's the,
So I think the overall wording is just not really.
Maybe it's in that first line, you say resignation is effective immediately. And then you
Yeah.
can still ask for it and write it. But
Yeah.
we say that the board members, yeah, resignation is effective immediately,
And then we still have the clarification.
yeah, and then we might get right into it.
Last year,
So. And then should we also talk about just adding the phrase at the end of the second sentence? So it says resignations for this or any other reason will require a written statement of resignation, comma, submitted to the chair of the Board of Education and the town clerk.
Yeah,
So while we're asking about the other, we as well ask about that.
yeah, we can ask about the town.
I think it should be the town clerk, but we could clarify, should be the town clerk or the first one. Person's office,
I think in the past it was town clerk,
or what is town clerk?
but I don't actually see it written
and I
anywhere
think that
now.
makes, yeah, I think that makes the most sense because the position over there has changed a couple times.
Yeah.
So I think.
Yeah.
And it's an official act, so it should go to.
So then, and the rest of the wording I think is okay. Is the board will consider the resignation request at the next scheduled meeting. And then or next following the receipt of written resignation, and then the board will then accept the resignation by formal action and declare the board position vacant until the resignation, unless the resignation. is
Maybe
withdrawn.
the board will acknowledge resignation. Instead of considers acknowledge, does that make sense?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I was sneezing.
it's okay.
The board will then accept, thank you.
So line 11, the board will, instead of consider the resignation request, because it makes it sound like we're mulling it over.
Yeah.
The board will acknowledge the resignation request at the next scheduled meeting coinciding with or next following the receipt of written resignation. And then the last sentence will stand. So then.
Well,
it'll be-
well, hang on a second.
You take up word request, acknowledge the resignation.
Well, the other thing is there's this resignations for this or any other reason
Right, like for
will
example,
require a written.
right, like when Jen resigned because she was
Yeah.
going to board of selectmen, so. It's for any other reason, for the reason of you don't live here anymore, or any other reason that they're resigning. I mean, you really can't tell someone you can't resign.
Well, you can, and let me explain. Let me explain how. Suppose there's a heated topic up for debate, and there's a motion on the floor to vote on something that's controversial. And one member says, well, I don't want to vote on this, and I don't want to abstain, I'm gonna resign. And everyone says, well, you can't resign without submitting a letter, so they handwrite a letter right there at the desk and say, I resign. Right? The board should be able to determine, you know, you're not getting out of this open motion.
Well-
You can resign as soon as we vote on this, you know?
Well, you can never compel a board member to vote.
Well, you can never compel a board member to serve and to continue to serve, but if they are on the board, can you compel them to vote on
No,
an
you can
open?
never compel a board member to vote. They can just abstain.
But they can abstain, yes.
It would keep it at 9. So versus. Shifting the,
Abstention has an impact on the
An
passing.
abstention is like voting for, essentially. Voting with the board, voting for the
In
majority.
effect, by voting with the majority.
Well, yeah, I mean.
But it can
if
change-
we're right at
yeah.
four.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, right, yeah.
I mean, that may be the, you know, the law school test reason why they worded it the way they worded it. Well, is that likely to happen? Probably, you know,
Well, it's going back to Shipman and Goodwin anyway, so they can look at it again. All right, so we're gonna have them look at. You like this? This is a working committee.
Point nine.
Yes.
You would consider saying any or all resignations will require a written statement of resignation. So take out for this or any other reason. I don't think you didn't need that.
Well, honestly, this is gonna go back to Shipman and Goodwin, and they're gonna wordsmith it. It's gonna come back not looking at all like this, and we're gonna have to do this again.
and I think you should keep any reason, because otherwise, all you're talking about is giving up your residence.
Oh, yeah, I don't wish to remove the any other reason.
Okay.
But I didn't like the consider the resignation request, because when someone resigned, it's not really a request. It's sort of a statement. It is a volunteer position. All right, so that's going to go back.
We're pretty much all involuntary, we're all in involuntary servitude.
We've been well told. All right, so let me get organized with 1 second. All right, so the 9220.3 and 5 then are going to go back to Shipman and Goodwin. Which something tells me we're going to be looking at a similar thing in the next one. The next item is 9220.4, board member removal from office. And we have the revised version here. You can sort of see the old version in the revised version. One of the revisions, one of the changes that was made that I do not like is the change from 2/3 vote to majority vote. So if you look in line 26, excuse me, an officer of the board may be removed for cause by a majority vote of the entire board. So the previous version called for a 2/3 vote of the entire membership of the board. And it is my personal opinion that it should be a 2/3 vote. I feel that if a board is particularly partisan, then you're looking at, you know, a simple majority of one party that could potentially, you know, I mean, there's more to it than that, but could potentially, you know, be voting someone out based on political reasons. I don't expect that to happen, but
Right,
it's
but I
a
mean, it's an
safeguard.
extraordinary act, so you want more than just a simple majority.
Right, and it was originally 2/3, so I don't really see the reason to change it from 2/3 to a majority. And I also think it would be an extraordinary act to actually vote someone off the board. So, does anyone have any comments or discussion about changing it back to 2/3 from majority vote?
I'm guessing the reason they had it as majority is because that's what the vote requires to seat an officer. But I don't see any reason why we have to keep the same standard. As seating for removal. I agree that it would be a bit more difficult to accomplish, so it's not done willy-nilly.
So there would be two areas, and so line 26, we would change the word majority to a 2/3 vote, and then on line 55. It also says, with such notice to be provided after being authorized by 2/3 vote instead of majority vote. So then my other bone of contention with this particular policy, are you?
No, I'm not, I don't want to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you explain to me like when it changed and who's recommending? it?
Oh, so this is the original
Yes.
policy right there, okay, and there it was 2/3 vote.
Yeah, so.
And so the changes, this is all Shipman and Goodwin,
Changing
changing it,
it, recommending that we switch to majority.
yes.
And perhaps the reason is very general statutes are the one versus order that they cite. Perhaps.
I mean, I'd go back to them and ask why they suggested the majority. I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, if that's their recommendation. I don't think it matters tremendously, given the fact that. You know, that doesn't. Like you said, that'd be a pretty tremendous act, and I would imagine.
Well, but it can happen for less extraordinary reasons and for political or personal reasons rather than objectively quantifiable reasons under these standards, if you make it just a majority. So I mean, I agree that maybe it has something to do with the case law that's LaPointe versus.
Well,
Board of
we
Ed.
could ask Shipman Goodwin to take a look
We
at
should.
it, I'm sure that it's consistent.
If they allow us, yeah, if their preference is majority, but that, that case doesn't force our hands, or the statutes don't force our hands, we may just want to keep it 2/3. So,
Right, so then the other problem that I have with this policy is with regard to, the reasoning it's giving for removing a board member. Because the one thing it doesn't mention is what is mentioned in our charter, under section 6.5 on page 20. Failure of elected board members to serve. So this, the revised policy of 9220.4 talks about all the reasons why you could decide to want to remove a board member, but it doesn't talk about failure to serve, which is embedded in our charter. So in the charter, it says any member other than an alternate member of any elected board or commission having 5 or more members who fails to attend 4 consecutive meetings without giving prior written notification shall be deemed to have resigned the office effective the day following adjournment of the 4th such meeting. The vacancy shall be filled pursuant to section 6.6 of this charter. So I don't know if we should reference that in this particular policy, that is another reason. Or, you know,
we could put 5, failure to serve in accordance with section blah blah of the Madison Town Charter.
Yeah, I agree with that, we should have it in there. Either reference the charter or put that language in there.
So we have to change afterward.
so I could,
Or.
I could work with Zoe to just wordsmith that in and then have Shipman and Goodwin review it. Yay. So now we ask them.
Or as defined by charter. But you can find, you can put the exact site in there, but in at the end of number 4, actually at the end of number 3 violates board policies, rules and regulations, you have to get rid of or. And then number 4 at the end after board, you have to put a semicolon instead of a period, and then put or.
All right, so put it in on like line 36.
Yeah. And then 936 will be 5, failure to serve as defined by, then you put the charter reference and then period.
Yeah, good, okay.
I can go over it with you too.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so. We can add that in and then ask Shipman and Goodwin about the majority of 2/3 change. Does anyone have any other issues or questions or comments regarding this policy? Anyone's going twice? All right, so if, do we want to just bring it back for a final review then before we vote on it, probably, because that's. Which one is to do here? All right, we are now up to policy number 9540.2 agenda. We have a copy of our current policy. And then we have the revised version from Shipman and Goodwin. Shipman and Goodwin's notes just say they recommend repeal and replacement with their model bylaw construction and posting of agenda for consistency and legal compliance. So one of the issues that I have with this policy is that the current policy under construction of the agenda states the superintendent in cooperation and communication with the board chairperson and executive committee of the Board of Ed shall prepare the agenda, yada, yada, yada. So in the new version, and under one, construction of agenda, A, the superintendent in cooperation with the chairperson of the Board of Ed, the board, shall prepare an agenda for each meeting of the Madison Board. So I would like to ask Galen, since he is a member of the executive board, his thoughts on the removal of the executive committee from helping to develop the agenda.
Well, self-interest in this, but in the executive committee, but. I think it'd be good to involve executive committee just because we get a broader sense of input. I'm not sure, I mean, I don't think it's ever gonna be an issue with the current chair, right, but for future boards.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I would say that I could see why they might have done that is just for practical reasons. You know, the more cats there are to herd, the harder it is to herd the cats. And so if the superintendent can consult with one person to prepare the agenda. But if you look right under it, anybody on the board has the ability to request an agenda item be put on, including people on the executive committee. And secondly, if you get any 3 board members who, you know, suppose the chair is intransigent, then you get 3 members who come together and write the board chair an email that says, we would really like this to be on the agenda. We know you didn't want it to be, but we want it to be on. Then it's incumbent on the chair to work with the superintendent to make sure that it either gets on the next agenda or a special meeting is set down. So everyone has access to the agenda, and that in fact is why I was not in favor of removing future agenda items from our current agenda, because it's an opportunity for someone to say, I would like Mary Ann did recently, I would like to cover blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I do like, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that was me.
Oh,
So in my personal opinion, I don't like the change from chairperson and executive committee to just chairperson. In my personal opinion, it's better to have more people's opinions. Whether or not they choose to involve themselves is another thing. Like, I don't think it requires like a formal meeting between the entire executive committee and the superintendent. However, I think the input of the executive committee without the formality of having to put it in writing that they want something on the agenda. You know, within the executive committee, you have both political parties represented and you have 3 people. So it's 3 opinions and discussion amongst the 3. And I think it's, I mean, I haven't been there, but it's probably more of an informal thing. And I think, in my opinion, there's no reason to change it.
I'm gonna, with great respect, I'm just gonna kind of play it out a little bit, how it would work in fact. So we tend to have a meeting once a month, like the chair and the superintendent meet once a month on a 1-to-1. And then every other month, the executive committee and the chair meet with the superintendent. We do discuss what's going to be on future agendas and stuff at those meetings. So it's not like there's not feedback and an opportunity. And usually, if any request comes from any member of the executive committee, you know, it would be a courtesy that, yeah, sure, we'll get it on. But when you say it has to be developed in connection or in consultation with the whole executive committee, then what you're setting loose is a situation where you might run afoul of the meeting posting rules while you have this back and forth 2 or 3 times to make sure, like, suppose you have the meeting and you set it up like, we agree we're gonna have this as our agenda. And then, you know, after that meeting, someone on the executive committee said, oh, geez, I forgot, I wanted to ask for this. Well, they ask for that, we're not in our committee meeting anymore. Then the superintendent has to say, okay, I'll check with the rest of the, you know, executive committee. And then has to get back to them,
But
and then
this
has
is
to get
the
back to
current
that
policy.
person.
There's our current policy that says
But
that
we're
the
reviewing
executive.
policies, we can change anything we want.
No, but my point is that that's not happening now. So right now, our current policy is that the superintendent creates the agenda with the chair and the executive committee. That's how it currently is. That's how it's been in our bylaws for a considerable amount of time. So by not changing it, there is no difference. By changing it, you remove the committee, the executive committee from the agenda decision-making process. And it is my feeling that there's no reason to do that because right now and in the past, I think it has worked pretty well. I don't think there's been any issues, not that I have heard, maybe you know differently. But, and certainly Dr. Cook, you can speak to this in like 2 seconds. But, it is my opinion that we don't always need to change things. If, you know, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
But it's not happening like that right now.
That's what I was saying. One of the reasons for the change is probably because that isn't practical, and it's, it's going, is that correct?
I would say that Dr. Cook keeps us well informed and in the loop with the executive committee, but it's.
It's about having a say.
Right.
Not about like necessarily everyone having to stamp their approval on it,
I mean,
without the formality of a written request to say, please add this to agenda. Or, you know,
Well, the formality only has to occur if the board chair says, no, I don't want to put that on there.
right, I mean, I think we're trying to safeguard, I think, the relationship. In case there is some sort of, you know, animosity amongst the executive committee in the future, or some future board, where maybe the chair does not work well with the other 2 executive committee members. This helps the other 2 executive committee members still have a say in the agenda, and not letting, you know.
sorry, to interrupt. If things get that bad, then those 2 disaffected executive committee members could recruit a 3rd member of the board, and force it on the agenda.
Well, that's true.
Caitlin, I think you're the perfect person to weigh in since you're on the executive board and you've been in the chair position and you've been on the executive board for a long time. Does the way it's working work well for the executive board? And the way it's working is not what's in our policy, so we have to figure that
I
out.
think it's worked pretty well, but in part because everybody has a good working relationship. So I mean. I guess I prefer to keep it in cooperation with the chair and the board of executive, or the executive board, but I don't have a strong feeling that'll make much of a difference.
The tricky thing too, when you think about it, is you're like, oh, it's working just fine because they have a good working relationship, but. God forbid they didn't, then you would miss the deadlines that I was talking about.
And another wrinkle is, quite honestly, I mean, it's over time, the composition of the executive committee has changed, and it has not always been party A, party B, party C. It's been party A, party A. I mean, party A, party B, party A. It's been party A, party A, party B, where the party in the minority has only had the secretary's position. And not, so I guess it could conceivably be that the party in power has all 3. I don't see anything in the bylaws that prohibits that. So we have to think a bit more globally than the current situation. We're currently stewards of the board and the executive committee. But that it's not always going to be constructed as it currently is.
Right. I guess the big picture, the idea that the board should be responsive to community issues that arise, and that there should be a mechanism for putting it on the agenda. Right. And so whether or not the executive committee assists in preparing the regular agenda, I do like that this bit about town residents and also 3 board members. I mean, that takes care of it.
Yes. I agree with that one.
Dr. Cook, what has been your experience with making agendas with boards?
It's been the recommendation that Shipman is doing. I always had an executive committee that I met with, as we do here. And so, for instance, tonight's agenda, we talked about that probably back in September. This was a request from like a year ago. So in September, when I met with the executive committee, I said, here's the plan for the year going forward. I never went back to them and said, in March, maybe we updated that form, but like, it wasn't like we had a discussion about it. We just said, March, we're doing this. And so it's several months past. It's usually the board and the board chair and the superintendent. I actually didn't like the optional, but I do like the 3 board members. That's pretty typical too. The 72 hours can be problematic because as you know, we post on Friday. Usually we try and post by Friday at noon if we can. If we have everything in, we put it out, 12 or 1. So somebody sending something over the weekend, that puts us in a tough spot to have to repost the board meeting, which is a lot of work.
Or we'll just put it on the following agenda.
Right.
Right.
And then the town resident one, that could be.
that could be dicey.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm a little bit loath to.
Yeah, I was a little, all right, well, I just
to
wanted,
answer your question, I like shipments without the optional,
so you like shipments change from,
right?
to just have the chair and not have the executive committee.
Right, but I don't see any change to the way we work things. And we have with multiple different executive.
Yeah, I don't think it'll make a difference in putting things on the agenda, not, I mean, you could even put in language. The superintendent in cooperation with the chairperson of the Board of Education. And is it also encouraged to work with executive committee? I mean, I think you can always extend that courtesy, right? Keep the executive committee informed and solicit their opinion. I don't know if it has to be formalized.
I guess it doesn't actually say like. That you have to have meetings on it, it just says you're working in cooperation and communication.
Right.
And so,
There's no hint of a veto tolerance in this either, right?
it's still my opinion to. Not change it to just the chair, but to keep it chair and executive committee.
I'd be in favor of changing it to just the chair because that is the actual practice. So that is keeping it kind of how it is. And I think that adding an extra step could make it very difficult to meet the deadlines with the agendas.
But I don't think it is adding an extra step because it's not a formal step.
Well, it could be now that we're making a formal. Making it a formal matter.
It's gonna be on your docket Tuesday.
It was, well, I think it was something that was really not paid attention to, so we didn't realize until now. That it had said the full executive board. So it's really keeping it the same by having it just the chairman.
Final weigh-in, Callan.
I would be willing to sacrifice a pawn and a to gain C, gain a rook C. In other words, I would be
Definitely am keeping C.
right.
What about this property?
That's how the negotiations apparently.
The 3 things compromise. What about this compromise, which I think clarifies it too?
Wait, but does everybody actually like C?
I do.
Yes,
Yeah, see, I figured that.
I don't think it would get to that if 3 board members came to me and said, we'd like to have this on the agenda. I'm gonna put it on the agenda.
Right.
You know what I
But
mean?
like you would need that, but this is just like, I think, a security measure in case there's some sort of like weird animosity, on the board.
Yeah, exactly. I
It's functional,
recognize that
yeah.
we're currently stewards of the board and it'll exist when we're gone and whatever. So I do like putting, clarifying that. What about this compromise? The superintendent, in cooperation with the chairperson of the Board of Education and with notice to the executive committee, prepare an agenda for each meeting. That way, the executive committee gets notice in advance of when the whole board gets notice. So if anyone says, wait a minute, what about that issue we talked about at our last executive committee meeting? Oh, geez, Craig and I both forgot. Yeah, let's put it on there.
Here's why I don't like that. Because assuming an executive committee that does not function well, then foreseeably have a chair who says, well, I gave you notice, doesn't mean I'm gonna listen to you.
Yeah, but if you say that, you're still covered by C.
Well, that was true.
Yeah. So, what I'm trying to do is give effect to your concern, which is let a bipartisan group of executive committee members have some advance notice so that they have an opportunity to impact the
All right, so let's talk about D, unless anyone says anything else in the rest of this. All right, let's move to D. So discussion about D, we know Dr. Cook doesn't like it. Galen likes it. Maureen,
Dr. Cook, what's your recommendation, just not to have it at all?
Not to have it.
Best question, right now, what's the mechanism for member of the public to get it, to request an agenda item? They would just write you,
Right, you, me or a board member?
okay? So.
I feel like there should be some sort of mechanism, like in writing, saying like, if there's something that the public really wants to have the Board of Ed address at a meeting, that they could do it besides. Like, for instance, we know that we have received letters to individual Board of Ed members from individual community members. And they usually CC all the members, but the members don't all respond because the only person that speaks for the board is the chair. So generally speaking, the chair will then respond to the email or letter or whatever. But that being said, if they feel that their issue is not being addressed or that they would like further discussion on it, like how do they go about doing that? Because, you know, I've seen email chains and I'm just not certain, you know.
They appeal it and then there's a hearing. And that's been done this year. And
But not specifically about something that they wanted the board to address at a meeting.
I also have one other thing.
well, but people don't understand and they think that they can get their issue addressed at a meeting when it may not be policy or budget or facilities
Okay.
or
I mean,
personnel.
it's like a
So
personal.
It may be- yeah, it's a personal issue.
So a couple of quick things. One is that this is a request, not mandate. The request can be denied. Secondly, there's a delay of time period between the submission, the consideration, and the placement, even if it were accepted. So really the pertinent question in terms of public relations, not public relations, that's a good bad publicity, but just like responsiveness is would having a mechanism to allow people to be heard be better than they're being annoyed or upset at the request being denied? You know what I'm saying? Right? It's like, right now, it's like, just do they derive more satisfaction from being able to make a formal request for an agenda item? Would that be outweighed by the request being denied? And would that sour?
Well, I think one of the issues here is the way that number 3 under the letter D is worded. It makes it sound like it's mandatory that it becomes an agenda item. Whereas I think it should say, if we keep it in, that the board would decide if it would appear on an agenda and at what meeting.
I took request to be there, supposed to mean that it might not be.
I took that way too until I read down and.
Yeah, it did seem like month 3.
On there. I think that this is something that we should leave. It does get dicey and the wording can be misunderstood so easily, just as we did. I think it's something we should leave in the superintendent's hands to decide if which topic should be presented to.
Not only superintendent, but following along that line. People still have access. We are, as board members, we're all like the conscience of the community. If someone comes to me with an issue that they think is really important, I have in the past, as a board member, raised it to the level where it became an agenda item. You know, and if the board's working well, then it will be a self-filtering opportunity all the time, open for any citizen to access the board, a board member or several board members, and say, hey, do you think we ought to talk about adding this to the budget? Or do you think we ought to talk about, you know, changing a policy? And I think what happens if you openly invite it by adopting C is you're going to get a lot of people who misunderstand the purpose and come with personal agenda items that are not community oriented. And then you're also going to answer your question, Galen. It doesn't matter whether you give them the time of day and say, thank you, but we're not going to put that on the agenda, but we heard you, or whether you just don't put it on the agenda, they're going to be just as ticked off. So I think you're inviting.
But what if you put parameters on it? So that it automatically excludes any sort of personal or student or anything that would be a privacy concern. And say if it's with regards to budget, policy, of things that fall under Board of Ed.
So I think of where we were 2 years ago. So this could have been used to have masking in schools every fortnight. So that we could continually have had to do a presentation on why we require masks in schools or that status or something like that. So I think that's my concern. Like it could just be something that we've addressed, we've said no on, or we're following state policy or however, and it just keeps going.
And we're also responsible for conducting business at these business meetings. And if we get our agenda filled up with stuff that is not conducive to us, it's not good for
But
business.
we have
This is
control
a
over our
better
agenda.
workshop model. Right, we go better.
And I think the wonderful thing we do to hear the public is we give them an opportunity to speak at every one of our meetings, and we're not required to do that. So any topic that anybody has in our community, they certainly can bring up at one of our meetings.
And we
difference,
have
though-
put agenda items on the
Yes.
agenda in direct response to.
Public comment.
Right, but the
Based on-
difference though with that is that during the public comment section, they are making comments and we do not respond. There is no back and forth. There is not a discussion on it. There's not even a discussion amongst board members on it. All right, so I think we're gonna have to table that and the rest of the agenda because we have run out of time. So
It's all good stuff. I know we're not getting all the way through it,
We'd like to, but
but I mean, that's a good.
A lot. You're very fast, thank you.